Hello, everybody. Today is Sunday, December 9th, and we're bringing you Block Digest number 145 at block height 553,169. So what is up?
Just another beautiful day here in Colorado, man. Nice Sunday. But yeah, it didn't seem like much was going on, but we managed to drum it up, huh? A lot of crazy companies, cruises, and patents going on. How are you doing, Najee?
I mean, as dark and way too dark and not snowy as it is here, I would probably rather be here than on some stupid cruise. I still have that position.
I think I'm with you on that one.
I want tropical weather back now. Now.
I mean, it's not really so much the weather, it's just that I would not want to be stuck on a boat with any of the people that went on that boat.
Simple solution, really simple solution. Just get completely shit-faced and be a gigantic asshole. It comes naturally.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate because I don't drink, which you know.
You should learn. You can be a bigger asshole.
It is pretty much every person I've observed who does it. It seems to be a skill, if you could call it that, that is not worth learning and actually just wastes time.
A very wise man once gave me this advice many years ago, which I will now pass on to you. You have to learn to channel your inner asshole.
Man, I don't know. I don't even think you could drink enough to have fun on there. You get confined in these little spaces. It's like being on a long flight or something. You kind of got to go a little crazy it's a weird situation. I mean, people die on those things. Those things are, I don't know. I stay away from cruises.
Well, who says that I need to have alcohol to channel my inner asshole?
It helps. It helps a lot.
Yeah. I don't know. To me, the alcohol gets to a weird a-hole. I'm good at channeling my inner asshole just through, I guess, yeah, I don't know. I get angry whenever I hear some things.
The level of fucks given inversely drops the more drinks you consume.
All right, so we are talking about the crypto cruise, just to let the chat know when they're wondering, like, what cruise? What cruise? There was a crypto cruise. We're going to cover it today, but there's been a lot of stuff going on. So maybe, well, not really that much, but we managed to drum up some stuff that should spur an interesting discussion. So, yeah, maybe we should jump in right into it.
But I want to waste more airtime because otherwise we're going to come short of 2 hours.
I think we're definitely going to come short of 2 hours, but yeah, there's definitely some stuff going on that's not really related to crypto that's going to be in the discussion, I imagine.
Well, I mean, so I don't know if anyone saw it, but tweeted out from the Block Digest Twitter account that we got a review on Reddit, and it was really good and positive. But one of the things they did say was that our show was very long to digest. So the fact that we might come under 2 hours is not a vice.
I disagree. All right, though. So, yes, first story. I think this is actually the first time in memory I can think of where the title is actually related to the first story. So I think we can all give a little golf clap and say that the ordering and the titles make sense today. But yeah, so patents. I know a lot of people in this space have very absolutist views about patents, and not that I disagree with them, but we live in a world where patents exist. And so from a realistic point of view, you just have to accept that and take practical steps to deal with things as they are. Well, Mastercard has filed a patent that is probably one of the most absurd patents I've ever seen filed in this space, outside of the giant list of nonsense we've seen coming out of nChain. And so effectively what they're trying to do is patent Bitcoin mixers. And to really give some perspective to this, and just a quick breakdown of Bitcoin privacy attempts in this space. When Satoshi first dropped the white paper, the very first proposal put forward to deal with privacy was Xiaomi and eCash servers, which is something I've talked about a decent amount on the show. Nopara has written up a Medium post on the basics of them. If you're not familiar, you can check that out. It was something with Bitcoin Cash in the title, sarcastically. And that was the first proposal for privacy on Bitcoin, layering Xiaomi and eCash servers on top to obscure the linkages of transactions. Shortly after that, people began constructing centralized mixing services, where you would simply send your coins to that service, and they would condense everybody's coins into one or a few addresses to mingle them all together, and then send things back out afterwards, so that there's no real way, without getting access to the mixer itself, to know who's getting what at the other end of it. And then from there, we started moving on to things like coin joins, confidential transactions, Nopara's recent implementation of a Xiaomi coin join to improve the server-side privacy. And we've kind of really moved away from centralized mixers, although there are some out there that still exist, such as bitmixer.io. Well, this is just ludicrous, because centralized mixers are a service that's literally been around, at least to my knowledge, for 5 years or so, and probably much longer than that. But that's getting into really the time before I came into this space, so I'm not too familiar with any mixing services that existed before that. But Mastercard's patent is effectively pretty much just having a single or a small group of addresses where people send their coins, and then Mastercard or whoever was operating it would forward payments from the other side of that. And it's literally just exactly like mixers have always worked. And they're trying to file a patent on this, like something where I cannot even count the number of services in the history of the Bitcoin ecosystem have done exactly this. Some are literally operational right now. And Mastercard's troll division has decided that they're going to go to the US Patent Office and claim that they have created a unique and novel system in proposing setting up a Bitcoin mixing service. And this is just the most absurd example of large legacy corporations patent trolling something that is just completely insane, to claim there is not prior art all over the place showing that this is not in any way whatsoever a novel invention or procedure developed by them. And yeah, here we are. So I'm going to really quickly, before we get into discussing this, say outright that in the absurd case that this patent is actually granted, and I think there is a decent chance that that happens, given how scattered a lot of information about things developed in this space is all over the place, that the patent office will not discover anything that would show invalidating prior art, that I do intend to try to find a patent lawyer familiar with things in this space and attempt to crowdfund money to get the patent invalidated. And from my research into these things today, it's pretty much just having a patent lawyer go over a lot of the filings. sending a notice to the company who has filed the patent, and then filing with the patent office with a fee that I think is $7,000, and going through the process of demonstrating that prior art invalidates the granted patent. And I think that if this is granted, this is an important thing to really do in terms of keeping this ecosystem free from huge corporations like this patent trolling pre-existing things. And in this specific instance, it's from everything I can put together from any angle is an open and shut case. Like, this is exactly describing something that dozens of services have done over the last 5 or more years of Bitcoin's history. And the prior art in this case is just completely uncontestable. So it effectively just comes down to filling things out in the proper legalese, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and then paying the filing fee with the U.S. Patent Office to contest it. And so if this does happen, I would like to ask everybody's help in actually dealing with this. It's merely a matter of $7,000. I'm sure everybody tossing in a penny here or there could easily clear things up. And it would show that despite Mastercard being a gigantic corporation with a huge budget, that Bitcoiners are perfectly willing to step up and deal with nonsense like this in a distributed way, in a way where people simply tossing in their small contribution can quickly add up and deal with the huge pockets of a company like this that is going to attempt to use patents like this to just troll around and bleed dry any companies or people building services like this in this ecosystem.
That would be a great thing if we could really, bounce back with some sort of actual fight in it, because these things, it's not just like them trying to grab some intellectual property and like they're gonna run with it. I mean, it's definitely got this like battle to go through, but I mean, like, that ecosystem's pretty efficient in developing a patent. Have the courts in East Texas, there's like a known system there in East Texas for patent trolling and all the judges and attorneys involved, and just sending out all these different cease and desist letters where, that really does, it's not just like the company trying to break into the space to try and make a name for themselves. It sounds more like this is just stifling development and something that's going to get in the way of development, because you have guys out there who are trying to work on things. We've seen this in the past with Walmart and the grid token and them trying to patent, a token to measure electronic services after, there's already been a few projects built out on that. And Bitcoin privacy right now is big. I mean, that's something that a lot of people are working towards. And, you mentioned all these different mixers, and we know there's more than that even coming down the line. And, you got these this big multinational corporation that we're basically competitors with as far as the Bitcoin ecosystem and what it's trying to achieve. So I mean, it would be great to have some like sort of group fund to sort of stand up and knock this back and just sort of put it out, like snuff it out before it even really gets that big. Because I mean, they could really try and just they could try and bring these people to court, or they could try and just slow down development. It's hard to say that they would actually get rewards from it. So I think like that's the ultimate goal, is to just try and slow the system. But for sure, it would be good to fight that back if we can.
Well, I mean, it's just like, regardless of your stance on patents, I mean, I am not a fan of patents either. I think the entire idea of owning an idea is ludicrous. But even that said, there is a very clear difference between actually coming up with something unique that has not been done before and simply grabbing the work of other people and claiming ownership over that. I mean, to draw an example, we recently covered the Intel patents on ASIC designs, where they made a few novel changes to the way that the actual interaction between different chipsets and with Bitcoin data structures is done to lead to an efficiency increase. And that's actually something new that I have never seen in ASIC designs before. That's not something that was done widely, and Intel is just claiming as their work and claiming as their idea that they own. When this Mastercard patent is just undeniably them seizing something that has been developed by numerous people in the space over more than half of a decade and claiming it is some unique invention that they came up with, that it is their original idea. And that's absurd. And a company trying to do something like this, it needs to be dealt with, because as bad as it is that we are going to have to deal with companies that actually do create new, unique things in this space and patent them, limiting the ability of people to use new inventions on top of Bitcoin. It is a completely another thing for things people are already doing to be patented, and then the use of those techniques or developments being limited without licensing fees to what is effectively a thief. And that is absolutely unacceptable, because that is not simply limiting the options of what can be done in the future. That is removing options of things that are already done now. And that cannot be allowed to happen in this ecosystem. That is kicking innovation in the teeth and preventing it from getting up again.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. I mean, what Intel put forward, I mean, you find a real efficiency there. And if that's something that they want to license out, you know, I mean, whether the efficiency, that's what to be seen. But I mean, like you're saying, you could see that there's a difference in the way that the system is being used than it's been used in the past. And with this, it's like you're saying, it's pretty clear cut that this has been prior art and been used before by the community. And so, yeah, I would say this is just trolling, but you know, yeah, it's something that shouldn't be allowed to stand. I mean, I hope that we can get a good fight going to where it just puts it out of its misery. But, you know, at the same time, I know it's hard to get some of these jurisdictions to back down, or, you know, even just go along with what's right. So I'm hopeful, though, that can happen. I mean, we'll have to wait and see if we can muster that up, though.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you don't have any input, Janine. I guess move along into your story, Rick.
Yeah, right. I think Janine's still breaking all that stuff down for that cruise. So let's just jump right into what's been going on in Southern Europe, or some nations from Southern Europe getting together. So, yeah, the G20 met recently in Argentina to discuss global macroeconomics. And, well, also recently, 6 nations from the EU got together to discuss a route forward with what they are labeling distributed ledger technologies, or blockchain and cryptocurrencies, however you want to label it. They're getting together to come up with a plan on this. So the government of Malta tweeted out on Tuesday that the governments of France, Spain, Italy, Greece, Portugal, and Cyprus signed a joint statement on a shared vision with Malta. That vision encompasses not just DLT, but also working together to develop other emerging technologies like AI and 5G networking. They'd like to be able to be the leader in the area for a digital ecosystem. Of course, like most governments looking into these technologies, they'd like to use it to streamline shipping and land registry, healthcare, and one I haven't really heard yet over here, education. I mean, we just started to discuss higher education, taking on the role of trying to educate the public, but it hasn't evolved much more than a conversation. However, over there, it looks like these are the first steps to actually implement that idea. The Bitcoinist article says, quote, "The signees of the statement believe it is a government responsibility to promote emerging technologies and pledge to do so. This will be through educational programs at all levels to ensure citizens understand the technology's potential," end quote. And from the statement signed, it was said, quote, "Any legislation on distributed ledger technology should take into account the decentralized nature of such technology and should be based on European fundamental principles and technological neutrality," end quote. So, yeah, there in Southern Europe, we have this European Blockchain Commission working together to develop best practices through regular meetings to discuss technological developments in the sector. And they also plan to work together to develop cross-border DLT. Yes, I don't like the way they keep saying distributed ledger technology, but at this point in the game, it's like cyber currency or virtual currency or cryptocurrency or blockchain. It's just right now, this is what they are labeling it as. So the second link in the show notes goes on to outline the digital economy and society index called DESI, as it's pronounced in an acronym. So this report outlines progression of digital economies within the EU. Right now, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and the Netherlands are leading the pack with the most advanced programs. The country coming in second are Luxembourg, Ireland, the UK, Belgium, and Estonia, which leaves Romania, Greece, and Italy to have some of the lowest scores on this DESI index. So the key measurements they use to grade these areas are one, connectivity, which is measured through the deployment of quality broadband services and the speed of those services. So the second one is human capital or digital skills, which measures the people in the area's ability to develop the technology. And number three is the use of internet services by citizens, which measures the area's use of a variety of online activities, such as online content consumption, video calls, as well as online shopping and banking. The fourth is integration of digital technology by businesses. That measures the digitalization of businesses and e-commerce. And number five is the digital public services, which focus on the status of e-government and e-health public services. And lastly, here, as far as the key measures go, research and development, ICT, that focuses on R&D for information communication technology. And this isn't labeled as such in the article, but this could be seen as the major security aspect of this grading system. And these are just key measurements out of 24 data sets that enable this trend analysis. And I'd say this is a great development for the area, especially to see France involved when they are currently going through so much political strife with the Yellow Vest movement and austerity measures. We see Greece and Cyprus in the bunch, as they already know the major consequences of such measures. So I think this is a real positive development for Southern Europe, and I believe with Malta leading the way, it gives them a firm footing within the financial sector. And the remaining three involved, Spain, Italy, and Portugal, are very close to these affected countries and know the problems could or already are starting to spill over into their respected areas. So I think it's also a good thing as it's helping establish best practices within the ideas of e-governance. That's an idea that they're really excited about here in Colorado, and it'll be great to have some hard data points and implementations to look at and draw information from in order to better understand its possibilities and sort of see how that's all going and building out there. But yeah, that's what's going on with these 6 nations getting together. Did y'all have any comment on this story?
I just thought it was interesting that it was mostly one led by Malta, which is taking huge steps to really attract cryptocurrency-based businesses and investments into the country. And then also it's pretty much all of the EU countries dealing with stagnating economies and high levels of debt right now. Italy, Spain, France with the with what's going on there right now, Greece. Like it's all of the member states of the EU that really need to look anywhere they can to really drive economic growth and employment opportunity in the country to, one, stop the stagnating quality of life for their citizens, and two, just develop some kind of industry or revenue source to really help them deal with the massive debt problems that most of them are dealing with right now. And like, honestly, looking at this, obviously it's kind of the same nonsense every time we see major governments start to look at blockchains in general, the supply chains and medical records. Although I do think there is a place, as long as there is actually a strong government to back up property rights for things like land title deeds or property registries, using some kind of digitized system based on cryptography. But mostly I kind of want to look past like all the typical nonsense there and just look at the potential, given all of the issues going on in the European Union right now. France is in complete chaos. The Brexit is, it seems to be at least, boiling to a head with a huge economy wanting to pull out of the EU. You have the debt problems going on in Italy, huge economic problems in Spain. I mean, this seems to me to be the kind of first drawing of a line where we could potentially see the EU fragment into separate blocks and really have them take completely different paths in terms of how they are attempting to manage their economy and their debt issues. And if this group of nations really starts integrating more tightly and working together, I really do think that we could see the EU fragment in half and see one half of them really move to kind of deregulate and incentivize activity based on cryptocurrencies and technology in general, and the other kind of continue this absurd path towards attempting to lock things down, overtax things, and pretty much just plan out how the economy should operate. And I feel like if that line is really drawn starkly, we could see huge consequences for Europe in the long term in terms of opportunity for growth for these nations and rapid stagnation for those who don't incorporate into this more liberalized attitude that I see potentially developing out of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the interesting perspective when you're looking at this story, is just like you start to think about the bigger picture of the past few years and what's been going on in the EU. And you think about Brexit and you look at Cyprus and Greece, and you can kind of, just sort of see the fallout of what these financial measures can have, and, how far that stems. I mean, like, we're starting to see that in France. And like you're saying, we have these other debt-ridden nations together. And I mean, I think they see the writing on the wall whenever you look at, Paris burning, and you see what's happened to Cyprus and Greece. And it's not thinking like, oh, well, that's not gonna happen here. I mean, you have to imagine that can happen anywhere. And especially, like, right there, these are your neighbors. So I mean, like you're saying, I could be a pretty strong line in the sand just to sort of see how exactly this unfolds. But I mean, Malta is, yeah, they're like one of the leaders here. I mean, like, Binance, I think, has their headquarters there. And we were talking about RSX possibly headquartering there. And it's just one of the places where you can see, similar to Switzerland and Luxembourg and Prague and, the Czech Republic, all these areas where this technology is starting to take over. And I mean, those areas, it seems like there's this advancement in this DESI index, and they're just trying to go ahead and catch up with the basically the right political alignments. I'd be interested to know who was there for France, because you got to be questionable about, like, the current administration, whether or not that was one of their officials, or I wonder if that was an official that might align themselves closer to this yellow vest movement, considering that's got a large portion of the community backing. So I'd be interested to dig a little bit deeper into that aspect of this.
Mm-hmm. All right, Gene. So how are your notes coming along?
I think I can handle it. I don't really want to talk too much about this, but there were some interesting things in this article, so I thought I might. Yeah, so unfortunately, for any of you who would have absolutely hated this event, I have to remind you of that infamous blockchain cruise that was hosted by Coinbase in September this year, where a bunch of mostly mediocre, if not outright scary, blockchain enthusiasts decided to get on a boat together, even though a lot of them either hate each other or have nothing interesting to say to anyone besides price predictions for their favorite ICO. A lot of the people in Bitcoin, including me, thought that event was pointless and boring before it even started. And if for some reason I had been airdropped like some fork coin onto this cruise ship at any point, I probably would have thrown myself overboard or hidden below deck in the service area with the normal people. I certainly would have not paid a single cent to be on this boat. But for some reason, It's mostly funny. A feminist writer named Lori Penny, who runs the Penny Red blog and refers to herself as a nano celebrity on her website, published an article in Breaker 4 days ago titled 4 Days Trapped at Sea with Crypto's Nouvelle Riche, which, in case anyone is unfamiliar with the term, is a French pejorative for a person or group who has come into wealth recently and previously belonged to a lower social class, in contrast to those with inherited wealth who don't. They have their own set of terms. But she basically writes at the start of the article, 2 months ago, an editor from Breaker called and asked if I wanted to go on a 4-day Mediterranean cruise with hundreds of crypto-crazed investors and evangelists. We'll cover the travel, he said. Write something long about whatever you find, he said. It was 2 a.m. and I was over-caffeinated. I remember explaining that I knew almost nothing about either cruises or blockchain in the way that Sir Ian McKellen in the criminally underrated series Extras explains that he is not actually a wizard. 5 days later, I was at the port of Barcelona boarding a ship, by which point it was way too late to wonder for the upteenth time about my life choices. I'm questioning her life choices too, many of them. But so I didn't watch any of the video footage from that event at all, but I did decide to go through this article, and even accounting for the fact that I'm not really that familiar with Penny's work, nor aligned with a lot of her views as far as I understand them. After reading her article, I am even more glad that I was not involved whatsoever with this event and did not pay attention to it. First of all, this boat was carrying, as was not a secret, this boat was carrying a combined John McAfee and Brock Pierce. And not only were they on the boat, but according to Penny, McAfee was, quote, the man most of the acolytes were keenest to get their picture taken with, and is constantly surrounded by private security who do their best to aesthetically out-thug every Armani-suited Russian skinhead on deck. That is a very descriptive observation. And of course, Tone Vase would not be caught dead on any boat that wasn't full of sex workers. There were plenty of those, but basically a bunch of women who, according to Penny, looked bored most of the time. She did talk to a few of them. They weren't employees for Coinbase. They were just hired sex workers, whether to actually provide sex. There was some weird thing that she mentioned in her article about there being an 18 plus ladies only room, which, okay. That's interesting. But basically most of them were Eastern European, very young women who were just hired to be on the boat to look nice for a lot of these guys who she has a very, this is one of the descriptions I agree with. She has a description about how most of them were like, they didn't actually look like they were having fun. They looked, lonely and kind of sad and not actually sure how to participate in a party, which doesn't surprise me. That's why I think she titled her article Lost at Sea, because she felt like she was on a boat with a bunch of people who were lost, like intellectually and emotionally themselves. Yeah, so she ended up talking also to Roger Ver, and her editor had like warned her that he was an egomaniac or something. And then when she actually talked to him, she felt that he was a lot more introverted and that he wasn't as bombacious as apparently a lot of people think of him, which was a little bit interesting. But then the art, I don't know, it just goes on and on about things people say and do, and the fact that there's like people are actually not having that much fun, and that the one time, let me find it really quickly, she actually participated or tried to participate in the debate between Roger Ver and Tone, and she tried to ask a question about like, why are you guys here? Like I don't know what the, I don't know what the moral or ideological draw is here. Like, it's mostly just talk about money and prices and, getting drunk and stuff. Why are you guys here? And then I guess Tone and Roger, instead of answering her question more philosophically, they started having an argument about whether she should buy Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash, which of course is completely predictable from both of them. The other weird thing that happened is she ended up following Brock Pierce, which, oh my God, why would you ever do that? Like, she followed Brock Pierce and his entourage off of the cruise and spent some time at some kind of vacation house that he has. I can't particularly remember. I'm trying to I read this article and it's very long. But they basically spent some time at some, tropical beach house or something, and she ended up having a party with them and almost getting kicked out because apparently there was a super secret cryptocurrency business meeting that happened in her vicinity, and even though she wasn't listening, one of the event organizers was like, "What are you doing? You're a journalist. Are you going to write about this? I don't think you can be here anymore." So it was just kind of, it was even more stupid than I expected it to be. But somehow she trusted all of these people enough to end up in it's at the end. She said, "I found life in a crypto hippie utopia exhausting and mesmerizing and terribly, terribly sad." Now I'm trying to find it. That was at the very end.
Yeah. I was okay.
Yeah, so she basically says she ended up getting like drunk and like, I don't remember the word that she used. She fell in a heap of bodies and whatever at a party and fell asleep on the sofa. I don't know if it was that, but she basically I wouldn't be surprised though, because she says like, "Oh, I want to keep this party to myself. I'm not going to give you all the details of what happened." And it's like, "Oh, that I don't even want to know. Like, don't tell me.
Yep.
I don't want to touch any of these people. I don't want to touch any of these people." But it surprises me because like she started off the article like, snarky, typical thing like, "Oh, what's blockchain?" and don't know what blockchain is. It's a bunch of people talking about money, and then she ends up having like, I don't know, she kind of ends up enjoying herself, which surprises me because, like I said, if I had been anywhere on this ship or in this after party beach house, I would have thrown myself overboard. Because the thing that doesn't come across in this article, it came across a little bit because she says like she's been told by a number of other people who are interested in cryptocurrencies that this is not how everyone in the space is. Like the people who do the actual important work are not on this boat. Let's just be really clear. They're not on this boat and they don't care about this cruise, and they would probably not want to go on the cruise with these people. Maybe they wouldn't even want to go on a cruise at all, but they definitely wouldn't want to go on a cruise with these people. I would not. So the thing that doesn't come across, if someone who is not involved in this space reads this article, it's another one of these articles where it makes everyone look like a bunch of idiots and drunks at, don't know what we're doing and have ideas that we haven't really thought through, which is, it doesn't really matter to me because there's been so many of these now that it's almost it's an old bell that rang a long time, but it's still annoying every time one comes out because it's like, I don't like these people. I don't want to hang around these people. Like, you should acknowledge the fact, if you're going to write this and say, "I'm aware that this does not represent everyone," then you should like, no one ever writes about the people who actually matter in this space because they aren't going on these crazy drunk trips on a boat in the middle of the Mediterranean. They're staying at home doing the work that needs to be done that no one wants to write about because there's nothing snarky that you can say about it and, be a, popular feminist writer. So yeah, there were parts of it that I liked and I agreed with, but in general, these articles just kind of suck because it's the crowd of people who are into blockchain and ICOs and stuff that I don't care about. I don't want to interact with them, and they're going to exist. Like, it's an open space. Anyone can come in, and that's a good thing. But there's also freedom of association, and these are people that I don't want to associate with. And then whenever they go off and do crazy shit, it still comes back on me because the language that they use associates them with us and me. For example, Roger Ver calls himself a voluntarist, which kind of taints whenever I say I'm a voluntarist because it's like, "Oh, well, do you know Roger Ver? Do you believe the same stuff as him?" It's like, no, I probably have a lot of disagreements. And his actions, obviously, I'm not approving of at all, but that's not the point. But yeah, just disappointing article in terms of another thing that it's like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of booth babes and boats and lots of money that people don't know how to manage and lonely broken people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess she did end up like just having a good time and drinking some alcohol. Because I read like it's a long piece, you know, and I read through half of it this morning, and it felt like it was just like it's like as bad as she kind of expected or worse. And then it must have turned around right after I started reading it, because yeah, it was like talking about how she was getting together with some of the actual women of blockchain that were there and some contest winner women. And, you know, they were completely outnumbered from these booth babes and hired Russian women and, you know, are these Eastern European women. And, you know, just, yeah, like all the problems it looked like whenever you just look at that sort of space of basically the degeneracy of what's going on. Especially, it was like peak craziness of like so much stuff. I mean, this was like in September of this year. There was like all this stuff like going on behind the scenes with Bcash and their fork coming up, and you know they still had you know that debate there with Tone and Jimmy, and there was a lot of like I don't know, like you're saying, just big egos there on the boat and all that bouncing around. I thought one thing you didn't bring up that I thought was really interesting, like yeah, you start to think about she maybe should have went to like a Breaking Bitcoin or a or you know building on Bitcoin conference to maybe like compare, because I mean you think about what goes on there, like the Lightning Hack Day, you got guys coming together with stickers and some nodes and you know just like really kind of nerdy stuff. But you look at this, like there was this quote in here, it's talking about Coinbank, the company organizing the cruise, had left little welcome gift boxes in each of the rooms. They contained painkillers, Alka-Seltzer, several condoms, pregnancy tests, and half a bottle of Jägermeister. And that was the gift box that came with this cruise. When you think about like the stark differences in these things, it's incredible. Like, yeah, you know, would have been good to get the other side.
Yeah, I mean, because yeah, like you said, the thing is, people like her are not going to show up at things like the Lightning Day or the Lightning Hack Day or the Building on Bitcoin because, as I said, those are events where shit actually gets done. And when shit actually gets done, you know, for people like her, it's not exciting. It's not something you can write about because half of it she doesn't understand, probably more than half. And the rest is like, oh, these are actually good, interesting people I could actually have a conversation with. It's much easier to just observe people doing stupid things and writing about it and making fun of people, which obviously it's very easy to do that with this group. Because when you like, I was at all of the Lightning Hack Days, and I mean, I wasn't really paying attention much, but I could easily say it was somewhere with like 25-30% women, which is still low. Because the number of women who are actually involved in cryptocurrencies is much actually higher than that, despite all of these New York Times-ish type pieces that say, oh, it's blockchain bros and there's no women. There's a lot of women. The thing is that there are a lot more men who are willing to go on a cruise ship where you just party and get drunk, and you look at, you know, Eastern European sex workers and stuff. There's a lot more people, not a lot more men who are willing to do that than women, obviously. But stuff gets done at other events, and journalists don't show up to that. Like, I would, whenever people would ask who I was, I would introduce myself as a journalist and be like, oh, what are you going to write about? And I wasn't there to write about anything because I'm not that kind of journalist who just goes and covers events like that in that way. But yeah, journalists are not going to show up to that. It's not exciting to them because they don't know what people are talking about, and there's no controversy. There's no like, oh look, there's almost all men here, there's no women, because there actually is women here. Now what do I talk about? You can't talk about the blockchain bro narrative, so what do? You just ignore the event because it doesn't fit the narrative.
Okay, Janine, I just want to say that I am not okay with this prejudice against Eastern European women. I am not okay with this.
I think it's a prejudice. It's just one of those unfortunate facts.
It's not a prejudice. It's something that she specifically pointed out, that all of these sex workers were from a specific region of the world.
I'm not okay with this assumption of thinking all Eastern European women are sex workers. That's sexist.
I didn't say that either. There are certain economic assumptions that you could make based on the probability that they grew up within a certain social strata, and that contributed to the fact of their employment or the circumstances of their employment. But other than that, it was just something that she pointed out in the article. Also, it seems to be a correlation with, where tone vase goes, there are women from that area of the world. Just saying.
I don't know about that. I'll just say, there's got to be some girls there from, the East or California, Vegas area too. Those, I've seen some of these, like that Florida convention, those Bitcoin booth babes were English girls. So I'm sure there was a few there, but, that's what the writer of the article was saying. So don't beat up Janine on that.
Yeah. Well, the writer of the article is sexist.
Yes, Shinobi. Well, the point of me bringing this up was mostly because I wanted to say that my experience being, because the thing is, if you want to if you want to be welcoming to women or have women enter a space that is safe, I always recommend that women go into Bitcoin, because when I go to Bitcoin events, I do not hear about like rampant discrimination or harassment. I'm sure it does happen, like it happens with human beings, but I just noticed that it doesn't happen as much at Bitcoin events as it does at all these blockchain and ICO altcoin events. I don't see it. I've never experienced it at one of the events. I always feel welcome. I get free stuff all the time. Like, one of the benefits of being a woman is that you get free stuff, more than my male counterparts.
That is
so
it is, but he's not going to leave you alone.
But it benefits me. So yeah, the problem with articles like this, as I pointed out also to the author of the one several months ago written in the New York Times, which she interviewed a bunch of women like Elizabeth Stark about their work and their experience in Bitcoin, and she completely left that out of the article and decided to only focus on the blockchain bro, no women aspect, which she got called out for. And the reason we try to call this out is because women who are not in this industry yet will see this and be like, oh, I can't get into this because it's just a bunch of dudes. Women aren't interested in it, or women can't get in because they're somehow being impeded or whatever. Like, not the case at all. It may be the case in some altcoin groups or some ICO groups, especially when you're talking about like hyper venture capital groups that have really no solid fundamental interest in the principles. They just care about making money. That might be a hard area to get into, but I have never experienced any difficulty outside of that. I mean, sure, like when I do experience difficulty, it's certainly not on a gender basis. Like, the difficulties I have are equally across women and men that I have met. It has nothing to do with, I just don't experience it. So if you don't want to experience bullshit like this, come into Bitcoin, because so far it seems like everything's okay.
Yeah, you're standing out of the crowd there in this, I guess, if you include everything in the ecosystem. But you're right. I mean, like Bitcoin events, I mean, I've had this Bitcoin meetup running for like a year now, and I always get like one or two women coming in along with some of the regulars, and it has a lot to do with people trying to keep their house in order. And I think there's a greater understanding that there's a bigger problem underneath our entire way that we do business, and we're starting to see like these fragmentations, and like then kind of just like what each other is finding the most interesting. Like, I mean, there is a strong libertarian and anarcho-capitalist, but those viewpoints don't always agree. And I mean, it's the same with basically all the parties going on. I mean, like, there's the progressives and the corporatists, and it's just like things are fragmenting, and we're starting to see like this split. And I mean, you do see it at the different gatherings you get together at. And I mean, when you go to one of these cruises or one of these major altcoin events, and they just start spitting out all the possibilities, it's people that aren't really grasping the problem, I think.
Yeah, and I just want to respond to a comment in the troll box about how I enjoy when Blake Anderson shows up and get all judgmental when Tone has some fun. Well, the reason I enjoy Blake's company is because he actually knows what he's talking about. And that's
Blake's
it.
Blake's a smart cookie. All right, man. That's it. Is that the signal to move on or something?
It can be.
Well, yeah, I think that's about as much as I have to say on it. Other than it's just something that we'll eventually work through. Sorry, I missed that. What'd you say?
So it sounds like an awesome party. Sad I missed it.
Yeah, not so much over here. I mean, maybe it could have been a good time, but probably equally as frustrating.
Alrighty.
Let's go.
So,
what else is it?
Next up is some news out of Congress in the United States. So, Representatives Darren Soto, a Democrat, and Ted Budd, a Republican, have put forward two different bills in Congress. The Virtual Currency Consumer Protection Act of 2018 and the U.S. Virtual Currency Market and Regulatory Competitiveness Act of 2018, with the aim of making the U.S. an air quote leader in the cryptocurrency industry. And really, this is like it's all right. I'll just start off going through the bills really quick. So the first one, after the bill is enacted, gives 1 year for the chairman of the CFTC, in consultation with the SEC and any other relevant federal organizations, to create a report that describes the methods by which persons could manipulate the price of virtual currencies, which types of virtual currencies, if any, are more susceptible to being manipulated. Small cap shitcoins. Small cap shitcoins. The effects on and particular harm to investors if price manipulation of virtual currencies occur, as well as an analysis to the extent of which the authority of the CFTC allows market surveillance of virtual currencies for manipulation, enforcement of federal regulations against people who are caught manipulating the markets, and recommendations for legislative changes to improve the ability of the CFTC to carry out monitoring and enforcement to prevent price manipulation of virtual currencies and to protect virtual currency investors from price manipulation. So, this is kind of stupid in my opinion. Pretty much all of these things are already covered under the CFTC's authorities. They have complete regulatory control over any futures market based on a commodity cryptocurrency, as well as already have the authority to carry out enforcement actions against spot markets deemed to be doing something illegal or criminal. The second bill requires, after a year of its enactment, the chairman of the CFTC and the SEC or other relevant organizations to create a report looking at the regulation of virtual currency industry in the United States in comparison to foreign markets to demonstrate the competitiveness in a global marketplace, as well as the potential benefits of the virtual currency market and technology in the United States commodities markets. It also requires recommendation for legislation to promote the competitiveness of the United States in terms of the cryptocurrency industry, to encourage the growth of adoption of virtual currencies in the commodities market that could benefit from virtual currencies and, in their words, access to transparent markets, to clarify the virtual currencies that qualify as commodities, both for existing currencies as well as a framework to be applied to future currencies not yet created, and to provide a new optional regulatory structure for virtual currency spot markets that includes a federal licensing, market supervision, consumer protections, and a structure to preempt the money transmission obligations on a state-by-state basis for anybody participating in the spot market. So something that would allow businesses to operate without having to go state by state and gain a license in each state to actually offer services to customers there, as well as an analysis on the feasibility, cost, and potential benefits of the new regulatory structure. So effectively, what they want them to do is poke around, find the air quote market manipulators like Tether being printed out of thin air to prop up the price, and develop a whole new regulatory framework to stick their nose up all the exchanges' ass in the United States and pretty much turn them into an extension of the US government in terms of cataloging, documenting, and forking over their customers' private information, which is really fucking insulting and really kind of stupid and pointless. You know, and this kind of reminds me of a lot of the arguments put forward by people from VanEck, SolidX, and the CBOE in making their arguments with the SEC to approve a Bitcoin ETF. These markets are not trivially manipulated. They are global markets that trade 24/7 that do not stop, with more and more people coming into this space to fill in the arbitrage trading opportunities between exchanges. You cannot just go onto an exchange and dump a few $1,000,000 on the market and expect to have any kind of concrete or lasting effect on the price globally. Because on every one of these exchanges, there are people waiting for the price to go up. And if the price goes up on that exchange versus others, they will start selling coins on that exchange, buying them on an exchange they have money where it's cheaper, and continuing to sell them on the exchange where the price is going up until it stops going up out of line with all of the other exchanges. And they will do the exact same thing if people sell it down disproportionately on an exchange. They will just buy them cheaply there, send them to another exchange where the price is higher, and sell them until the price stops dropping below the average of all the other exchanges. And in order to actually manipulate the entire global cryptocurrency market, you have to have more money than all of the combined people who are making trades like that, which is completely unfeasible, because you are literally talking about one or a small group of individuals trying to out capital the vast majority of professional traders in the space, because that's what they do. Any trader who is actually looking for a risk managed strategy to make money trading regularly in this space is doing arbitrage trades, because those are the predictable trades. Those are the trades where you don't have to roll your dice and hope that reading candlesticks came out right and risk losing a shit ton of money if you didn't. It's very simple. You look at the numbers across different exchanges and you fill in the gaps. And the bigger this market gets, the more it matures, the more people are going to be doing this kind of trading between exchanges, and the more difficult and expensive any kind of systemic market manipulation is going to become. It does not need a specialized monitoring framework from the government. It does not need the government sticking its nose up every exchange's ass and collecting private information in a government database on every single person who is a customer of these exchanges. This is something that the market works out on its own. And it's really just a complete lack of grasping how this works. And if the government really wants to move towards encouraging the adoption of these systems, I think what they should do is revisit previous bills. For instance, the tax exemption of small amounts of Bitcoin for capital gains. If you really want to try and push this in a way that creates opportunities for people and utility in the marketplace, then maybe stop requiring ridiculously onerous bookkeeping to simply be able to spend a small amount of Bitcoin on a consumer purchase. You want to remove friction. You want to actually create a competitive environment for these things in the United States, then look at that bill. Do that. If you want to create a competitive environment, look at perhaps a federal license that exempts people from state by state money service businesses license without all of this other shit attached to it. Because then a business can actually be competitive and open without having to go around state by state without or with insane costs and complicated interactions with each individual state government simply to open a business to service their customers. If you really want to be competitive, then stop trying to shove your thumb up every single commercial entity in this ecosystem's ass and step out of the way and let them open and run a business. That's how you'll do that. Not trying to put the entire ecosystem under your thumb.
Just to clarify, were you like that whole thing was about the first bill, the second bill, the competition bill, or is that like both of them?
Both of them. And a lot of other bills that exist right now that have just been languishing in Congress going nowhere.
But yeah, it kind of leaves them a fork on a decision to make. I mean, I feel like, if you're talking about the second bill on Regulatory Comparison Act there, like, I mean, they're supposed to look at other markets in the world to compare to see like how they, measure up. And I mean, I guess that kind of does depend on who you're comparing to and what you're trying to be. I mean, if they want to compare to Malta and Switzerland and the idea of, having individual sovereignty within your, the system that you transact on and the ability to, basically follow the American roadmap of freedom, I think that's the markets they should be comparing to. But, I mean, this day and age, it kind of makes me think like, hey, Russia, China is the big news. And like, maybe they're going to compare to that and compare themselves to whether or not they can lock down their population and make sure that they don't have these abilities. I mean, and so, yeah, I mean, I'm going to kind of cross my fingers here and hope that, the people doing this recognize that they're in a country that's supposed to be free. And I would hope that people would be working towards building out systems that help Americans become more independent and, try to be at the forefront of liberty within the world. But it's hard to say in this day and age, honestly. And, it is a little creepy to think that they might compare themselves to these other nation states and try and do what they're doing. But it's hard to imagine there wouldn't be political blowback on all of that. And it's where I'm kind of here sitting on the front range of these mountains, just sort of like observing to see which direction we're going to go. Because, I mean, I love this country and, I've served the country and everything. But I mean, like if they start comparing themselves to these countries and other countries like China and Russia and want to behave similarly as far as the way that it governs its people, it would be really, really upsetting. So I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that they're looking towards countries like Switzerland and Malta and, Luxembourg and these countries that are trying to build out a system that's a little more robust to manipulation, whatever you want to label that as. I mean, like, it's a manipulative market that's currently run in as far as picking winners and losers and who's allowed to play, where this kind of opens up the board. So
have you guys talked about the fact that I don't know if it's been confirmed, but I saw some reports that the European Union wants to start evangelizing for the euro and using that as an alternative to the US dollar for things that usually the US dollar is like the exclusive medium of exchange, including oil, apparently. Which, I mean, if you, because like, all, these countries are all, including the US, are about, apparently cracking down on manipulation and not allowing any single player to, discriminate against others and choose winners and losers. Well, that's exactly what the United States does with the banking system. The United States controls so much of that infrastructure. It hosts so many of the companies that run that infrastructure in its jurisdiction that they effectively control those companies. and any overseas operations that they have, that if they want to sanction, pass sanction or unsanctions, if they want to pass unsanctions, that affects a large portion of the world's economy, the decisions that the United States makes in the banking system. So I would like to talk a lot more. I wish they would be more concerned about the manipulation that they do in markets that are much larger and have a much greater impact currently on more people than this tiny crypto economy that affects, maybe 20 million people or something like that. Like, that manipulation has a lot more negative consequences, and it happens, and we know it happens because the United States has such an oversized role in that. So, kind of pot calling the kettle black here.
Yeah, there's definitely some I don't know, some developments coming down the road where you can kind of see these different alignments, like we were talking about with the 6 EU nations coming together to try and come up with this blockchain commission. And I mean, if that's, what's going on here as far as Euro evangelism, I mean, it could be like, that opposite side being formulated where, there's some people that want to run with the ability to control the winners and losers, but with the Euro. And you have some of these countries that are really trying to get an asymmetrical level of competition to where, those winners and losers are decided by the market. And it's definitely interesting. We're seeing the bills, we're seeing the formulations. There's some undercurrent there as far as like political alignments and everything. It's kind of spooky if I start thinking about where I am and these undercurrents.
Yeah, and there was also, like, to give a very recent example of, I mean, I don't know if the intent was manipulation, but it probably did end up having an effect on the market, which was US authorities. I don't know how much collaboration there was directly with Canadian authorities, but the US had I think she was the financial officer. I'm not completely remembering her position, but she was the chief financial officer at Huawei. She was also happened to be the daughter of the founder, I think, of Huawei, and she was arrested in Canada because the US was suspecting, or claims that they suspect, Huawei of violating sanctions about trading with Iran. So that's the United States being involved in the arrest, or like pushing for the arrest of someone in another country for violating sanctions in a completely other country. Like, this, and obviously that, I think, ended up affecting the stock price of Huawei, and a lot of other things in the stock market, because that looks like, oh wait, our relations between the US and China about to go screwy. So that's a recent example of things going bad because the US decides to like stick its giant foot in another jurisdiction.
Yeah, I mean, it really is spooky when you start looking at the optics of the recent G20 summit in Argentina, and then you start to see like this immediate, arrest of the CFO of Huawei, which is being charged with fraud. And I know that I even saw a report that she was released, but I'm not sure on that. But I mean, just the idea that you're going to grab a woman because she's near your jurisdictional area and hold her captive, that sounds a lot like a country like, I don't know, North Korea or China or some of these, dystopian places that we've heard of journalists going to visit and, them just getting arrested because they're related to a particular geographical area. And I mean, like, she is, she's close to a big telecommunications company there out of China. And we do know that there is this constant back and forth information war of surveillance. And I mean, like, there might be something really attributed there, but I mean, still, it's scary just to see him behaving this way so brazenly. And, like, we know that there's this big trade war going on and, this tumultuous stuff going on in the EU and France. And I mean, you can't just look at all this stuff and pretend that there isn't some major stuff going on. I mean, like, I hear everybody talk about, oh, this could bring on World War III. I mean, you look at all the strife everywhere, and through the previous wars, war is never like the entire globe, but there's always been large areas of the population that weren't in the combat, so to speak. but they didn't have this ability to just talk openly about what all's going on. I mean, it's there is a world war going on. There is a civil war going on. These things are going on. And I mean, you can't just keep looking at all this stuff and saying like, when's it going to happen? It's happening. And I mean, like, it's still kind of just like a strong undercurrent.
Yeah, and I was reading an interesting article titled "The Digital." I think this is a French word, so I'm probably going to mispronounce it. But the digital Maginot line. I'm not sure. I probably just screwed that up, but it's a really good article from Ribbon Farm. I mean, I have a feeling that they're in favor of this whole Russia influenced or decided the U.S. election, which I don't agree with. But there's a part in the blog that I agree with, which is about how the information war that's happening is not geographic, and it's not about influencing territories. Like, wars are usually about influencing territory, but when you have an information war, it's about influencing human minds. That's the new territory. So I thought
Right.
that was
With the internet, it's you can do that a lot easier, and it's really hard to stop unless you just, I don't know, go crazy with the other side on that information. It's
Hitler is not allowed to cross that line. Okay, is not allowed.
Yeah, you won't see Hitler. So yeah, it's definitely nuts what's all going on, but it's hard to really say which direction it's going, this favor or that, other than we're just watching it and hoping for the best.
Maginot. That's how you pronounce it. Okay, I just looked up how to pronounce this French word. It's Maginot, I think.
All right.
Maginot.
Anyway, title of the article: The Digital Maginot Line, Ribbon Farm.
All right. So we just ran through a bunch of countries and what's going on, but we got a couple more here. What else is going on?
All kind of very loosely related, but the Supreme Court in Chile just sided with the Banco Estado for shutting down a crypto exchange's bank account, and has pretty much set the precedent that banks in Chile can unilaterally close off cryptocurrency businesses from bank accounts. A small segment from the ruling was in regards to the inability to sufficiently monitor and identify senders of crypto payments. These characteristics and elements determine, therefore, the current impossibility for the bank to comply with the aforementioned obligations, since it prevents it from knowing in depth the financial activities related to cryptocurrencies developed by the appellant, the most relevant characteristics of its operations, the foundations on which these are supported, and finally, if their amounts are excessive or not, which is beyond absurd. Like, this is absolutely absurd. What they're effectively saying is nonsense, because any of these exchanges that comply with KYC AML regulations has identified every single one of their customers. Any purchase or sale of a cryptocurrency on their exchange is identified down to the smallest fractional amount and who made it, with their real identity connected to it. Any withdrawal of cryptocurrencies from this platform is down to the smallest fractional amount recorded and connected to who withdrew it or sent it to this platform. This is absolutely no different than an ATM, where a person with a bank account is able to withdraw cash and then go do who knows what with it without the bank having any ability to surveil what the cash is used for, and then another person or business being able to take that cash and deposit it back into the bank. So the entire rationale here for this ruling is ridiculous and has absolutely no logical footing to stand on whatsoever. But it is effectively set the precedent now that legacy financial institutions are allowed to indiscriminately cut off any cryptocurrency business from the banking services that they need to actually conduct any kind of business that deals with exchanging cryptocurrencies for fiat. And this is kind of them taking the exact opposite route that countries like the US is trying to do, like Japan and South Korea have taken many major steps to actually create a friendly environment and attract businesses that operate in this ecosystem. They are cutting themselves off. And like really this kind of goes like this and the previous story together to a degree, or at least the comments Janine was making about China and the Huawei incident, is kind of why I'm not really that worried about the G20 discussing a global regulatory framework. Like it's not something that's really practical at scale, in my opinion. Like you have way too much independent interest in each individual country's case to really have them all get on board with something. Like Chile has decided they're going to fight tooth and nail and allow their banking industry to do everything it can to stomp out the adoption of cryptocurrencies. You have China taking a slightly more measured approach in the same direction. Countries like Japan, South Korea, the US attempting to do everything they can to encourage these businesses to operate here. And places like Malta going even further in terms of deregulating and attempting to attract businesses. Like it's really laughable to think that there will ever be a global consensus on this. You will always have countries who take the route like Chile is right now, effectively cutting off their nose to spite the face and trying to prevent anything in this industry from taking a foothold there. And other countries seizing that opportunity to attract that business. This will be a constant tug of war between people who see potential economic gains from welcoming this system and those who see a threat and attempt to close it out. And I mean, like this sucks for the people of Chile. This really does. And I do believe Brazil as well, not too long ago took a similar action or was in the process of deliberating it in their courts. And it's really sad because it seems to be that the more we see actions like this, it is frequently happening in places where the populace are the ones who stand to benefit the most from being able to integrate with technology like this. And the places where it is being welcomed the most is really where it's not going to do anywhere near as much good as a place like Chile. I mean, yes, there is economic hardship all over the world. Americans, people in the West, definitely stand to see a benefit from something that will appreciate in the long term as a way to preserve their wealth. But frankly, like we are not in dire need of payments infrastructure in the same way that places like Africa are, or some areas in South America that are dealing with rampant hyperinflation and need that ability to preserve wealth much more urgently than we do. And it's just sad.
Yeah, something whenever I'm like looking at this story, I mean, and we're talking about, kind of all sort of coming out of this G20 event and these different sides aligning there. And one of these guys you left out was with China and Chile, maybe is India. And India led that charge with those statements at the G20 about how they need to track down all these AML criminals that are laundering money out of their country. And I know that India and China, they've kind of been worded together in the same breath recently as far as different things that they align on, since these trade agreements have kind of been thrown into question with Trump and everything. And I mean, maybe this is kind of an action sort of coming out of that. And, I'm just still holding my breath on what's going on in India, but it's hard to look at this and not think that, yeah, there's something that might see something similar in India. But I mean, we'll see how it goes. All these bans, there's usually ways to route around that. And we're just going to have to see how those, whether or not those are going to be flourished or whether or not those are going to be stamped out. And we'll, just like all these stories, it's like we just got to, keep our eyes on the situation and see how it develops, because, this is just a lot of moving pieces.
Hmm. I guess next up, also something going on in South America. Maduro has announced that starting in next year, they are going to attempt to transition sales of their oil reserves into the petro instead of the US dollar. This was announced from the state run media company Telesur. And apparently, they have a 6-year financial plan to use the petro to slowly transition away from things subjected to US led sanctions against Venezuela. And this plan was announced after Maduro met with a number of different countries, including the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. And coming in 2019, they're also going to be meeting with the members of OPEC to attempt to pitch the petro as the main digital currency backed by oil. So they, or at least Maduro, seems to be very intent on pushing forward and actually trying to create some kind of utility value for the petro, despite the fact that their Congress effectively declared it illegal borrowing against their oil reserves back earlier this year. He keeps pushing ahead. I mean, they started selling passports in the country for the petro, requiring the petro for sales of them. They tied the sovereign bolivar to the petro in July, and I believe recently doubled its value arbitrarily, and are now trying to push forward and encourage sales of oil in the petro. And honestly, like, he continues trying, but I do not see this really going well at all. Like this entire network, it started as an Ethereum token and then a NEM token and an Ethereum token again, and it was apparently launched as a copy paste clone of Dash. He continues trying to push its adoption domestically in the country, but from the little I've seen of it, it's not actually picking up. You have major chains in the country accepting other public blockchain cryptocurrencies instead of advertising acceptance of the petro. And the idea, personally, I think, of trying to push oil sales in this is delusional, because this creates the exact same kind of dynamic as using the US dollar. You are putting yourself at the whims of Maduro and his followers in the Venezuelan government in terms of the value of what you are actually using to purchase oil. And obviously, in order to purchase oil, you have to get your hands on the petro. And right now, there's really whatever insignificant fraction of Venezuelans are using it, the Maduro government, and whoever purchased it in the pre-sale. So to actually try to use this for massive oil sales, you are effectively just giving money to the people who all got in on this token sale and hoping that the value that the petro will be redeemed for in terms of oil stays to some degree stable. So this is really, in terms of dynamic, no different than redeeming the dollar for oil, except instead of trusting a major superpower that has a huge amount of infrastructure and an economy that's not completely in the toilet propping it up, and are now trusting a deranged dictator in South America whose currency is hyperinflating to the point that his people are starving, and in a few years has gone from a single note of the currency being able to purchase food for a few days to a giant pile that you would need a suitcase to carry, not even being sufficient to feed yourself for a day. So I do not see any kind of logic or hope of this actually being used in this way. I mean, this just seems like the pipe dreams of a deranged dictator.
Yeah, when we're just talking about all these different countries and their different, things that they're going through and different crises, we know, Venezuela's been going through all this hyperinflation, and it's definitely it's one of these things where I just wonder if I was looking through this executive order that I know was issued against the Venezuelan Petro to see if it was limited to just people in the United States, and I don't think so. And I'm kind of curious about that, just because, yeah, I can imagine like maybe one country makes an announcement, says like we're gonna transact with Venezuela and the Petro for oil from now on, in order to curb or stem this problem that they see either being derived from the United States or through the system that they're using that's driving this problem. But reality is you're really just giving a lot of money to these people that were involved early on, and basically a small few people at the top of Venezuela. You're not really helping the Venezuelan people. It's hard to say that there would be any good coming from that, but I could definitely see like a country trying to take a stand against the West and saying like, well, because we've already heard it discussed, right, between Iran and Russia, talking about coming up with some way to transact through crypto and cryptocurrencies instead of the U.S. dollar for oil. And when we're talking about like France and going through all their troubles right now. I mean, a lot of these countries are looking for ways out of the situation. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody that not understanding the system that well that might be a big problem down the line if they decide to actually do that. So that's the risk whenever a country just grabs some token and some person and says like, yeah, we're going to do this. It's like, well, now the transactions in that, you're going to really make that person super powerful. So if that actually happens, I doubt we'd ever see Maduro get out of his chair.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you said it perfectly. Like, this is not anything but a scheme to line the pockets of the elite in control of Venezuela right now. Like, it's delusional to think that this is in any way going to help printing a cryptocurrency out of thin air that a small cabal of people hold the supply of, that they are going to require money in exchange for giving you, is going to help anybody but them. Like, it's absurd.
Yeah, that's why we got to get it right, man. So yeah, doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. All right, I guess 35 minutes to go. I guess let's get into the next one. So, Morgan Creek Digital, a fund manager of cryptocurrency and digital assets, is trying to pull a Warren Buffett and set up a $1 million bet that cryptocurrencies will outperform the S&P over the next 10 years. And to make this bet, they want to use the Bitwise Digital Asset Index Fund, which we actually touched on lightly in the last episode, I believe, when mentioning that they were launching a solo fund for Bitcoin and Ethereum. And this index is composed of Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bcash, EOS, Litecoin, Monero, Zcash, Dash, IOTA, and NEM. And really, this is not that crazy of a bet. The bet is set to begin January 1st, 2019 and conclude in 2029 if anybody actually takes them up on their bet. But cryptocurrencies have already outperformed the S&P in the past 10 years. So by enormous margins. And really, I think anybody who took the other side of this bet is a complete and utter fool. And when I say that he's trying to pull Warren Buffett made a similar bet in 2008 that he won earlier this year, that the S&P would outperform hedge funds. And like, honestly, I'm kind of interested to see if anybody actually steps up and takes this bet in terms of big faces or names from the legacy financial system, because this is a guarantee egg in their face if they actually take this bet. I mean, in my opinion, honestly, you might as well just light $1 million on fire right now if you're going to attempt to bet against this statement by the Morgan Creek Fund.
Yeah, I could definitely. This is a good bet on the that they will outperform the S&P. And yeah, I mean, got to separate some of those greater fools from their money. And I mean, like, maybe they'll take the bet because like these guys are getting so up in their age. I don't even know if they got another 10 years left in them, but we'll see. Let's see if they take the bet.
Mm-hmm. All right, so what do we got next? A bunch of punching bags.
Oh, man.
Yay!
Coinbase.
I guess I'll lead the first two, and then you'll pick up the last one, Janine.
Yep.
Alrighty. So Coinbase has decided to add 4 more shit coins. Seeing as they
Only
already
4?
have, well, yes, so far. But Coinbase Pro has set up Civic, District 0x or DNT, never heard of it. Loom Network, never heard of it, and Decentraland Mana, which is the fuel, I guess, for the stupid virtual blockchain VR land thing, and are setting up to get full trading going. When was the date of this? Today, actually, I believe, or tomorrow, once the order books actually fill in. And all of these are only going to be trading against USDC. What a shock. So I think given this and given the fact that their back-end infrastructure is already set up for Ethereum, that rapid fire strategy going forward to attempt to undermine Bitcoin is going to just toss as many ERC20 tokens trading against USDC as possible to really just try to undermine Bitcoin's position as the reserve asset in this ecosystem. And honestly, I'm just waiting for them to toss something up there that gets labeled as a security by the SEC, because it would be really fun to watch Coinbase deal with that kind of legal fallout.
I mean, even if they did, it's Coinbase. They have a bunch of like revolving door regulators that they hired, especially within the last year or so. So I don't feel like they would. They're basically just going to turn into the banks, and when banks do naughty things, they get a slap on the wrist, which hurts less than the money they made doing the thing that got them in trouble in the first place.
Mm-hmm. I mean, another thing though is really I want to see how these markets react, because wasn't it a little bit of a disappointment after they listed BAT, where the price actually plunged after their listing?
Yeah, I mean, it plunged more than it was already plunging.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, we'll just really have to see in the long term how this plan plays out, whether it actually does anything to undermine Bitcoin in the long term, or whether they just start offering up lots of liquidity for bag holders to dump their bags on other people's heads.
I mean, like, they just listed Zcash recently, right? Like, I kept seeing that tweet coming back up and back up and back up, like they were trying to make sure they got their pump in, and it doesn't really look like it now that I'm looking at the charts. Slower.
Do they just, for Zcash, do they discriminate between transparent addresses and stealth?
If I recall correctly, they will only deal with transparent addresses.
Oh,
Of course.
That's not a surprise at all.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And the other thing that I'm sure a giant horde of retards are peeing their pants in excitement about is Coinbase is investigating, or in their words, exploring support for XRPP. That's right. After people screaming at them for more than a year, after turning down a bribe from Ripple Labs to list Ripple, Coinbase is finally exploring the possibility of maybe considering listing XRPP. And from this post, they have a little disclaimer here. Adding new assets requires significant exploratory work from both a technical and compliance standpoint. And we cannot, italicized, guarantee that all assets we are evaluating will ultimately be listed for trading. Furthermore, our listing process may result in some of these assets being listed solely for customers to buy and sell without the ability to send or receive using a local wallet. So let's all take a moment, put our hands together, and watch the giant popcorn show that is going to be the XRPP heads losing their mind about how their bags are going to pump to $500 only to have Coinbase turn around and not list this because it's way too risky to list something undergoing a class action lawsuit right now for being a security, where the company is caught red-handed claiming for the last year or two that they had nothing to do with the issuance of this asset, and getting busted with archives of their website from years ago where they explicitly said that they issued this asset. Have a round of applause, XRPP heads.
But I mean, Shinobi, the latest theory is that Satoshi created Bitcoin in order to fund Ripple. So
Wait, didn't some blonde bimbo say that? What's her name?
Oh no!
we don't have to use that language.
Right.
I do. Remember what I said at the beginning of the show. You have to learn to channel your inner asshole.
Okay.
Bipolar troll.
Don't keep your channel on 24/7.
Yeah. So I guess they just have to, at least give these XRP guys something, right? Because they are relentless in the way that, I saw Bakkt make an announcement, and the biggest reply was an XRP guy going like, how come Bakkt's not supporting XRP? It's like, are you kidding me? And then whenever I see new people coming to the meetup or I meet people on the streets, one of the first things they have to tell me is, I think XRP is going to be big. It's they're really working it, man.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
I'm lucky. I've never heard a person anywhere say that to me.
Just gotta come to Colorado.
And it's not like I'm trying to purposely avoid them. It's just that I've never encountered such a creature.
Yeah, I think their relentless talk of it is what's doing it, because for the most part, these are people that have absolutely no idea what's going on other than this sounds interesting. And then the next thing is always like, I think this XRP might do something. Like they've heard that. Like, so they're definitely loud and out in forces, and, Coinbase is just throwing them a bone.
I think this is just them trying to make an appeasement because it's now the number 2 crypto. But ultimately, like this just isn't going to happen. Ethereum was explicitly declared not a security, despite the fact that obviously is. That has clearance.
Well,
and
wait a second. They
They
explicitly declared that Ether was not a security when it was released. Or anymore, yes.
Yeah, it's sufficiently
and that they
decentralized.
Cricket.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying, like, these guys, right where they're at right now with Ether, they think it's like, that's where it's like it could, in theory, because Coinbase has all these regulators working in and out of their doors. And we know that Ethereum's been very close to these lobbyists, and they got them to be able to give that language that in a favorable way, which, at the time, I'm surprised Ethereum didn't blow up, but it did the wrong way. So, they might get the language they want, but I doubt it's actually going to do the moves they want. But that's a big if still.
Yeah, it's just I don't see it happen. Like they are literally in a class action lawsuit for being a security right now, and have been making provably false claims about having nothing to do with the issuance of XRP, despite archives of their site from years ago existing where they explicitly state that the company Ripple Labs issued and created the token Ripple. Like it is not going to end well for them.
Another wait and see, but I think you're right.
Alrighty though. You want to take the last swing at the punching bag, Janine?
Yeah, it's almost like Coinbase is trying to make us hate them because I think it was within the last week or so, Jameson Lott pointed out, I mean, that's who I first heard about it. Jameson Lott pointed out that some lawyers from Coinbase had filed a trademark application to trademark the term BUIDL, as in misspelling of build to kind of hearken after HODL. And it looks like the filing date was October 2nd. So this is already, it would already be over a month old. And so there is basically a thread under Jameson Lopp's tweet looking at, who was actually the first person to use the term. Because we're like, no, there's no way that Coinbase can trademark this. And it turns out there was one reply, I think it was from Bashco, that one of the people to use it early on was Michael Goldstein. But then John Light at Litecoin found another example from Balaji from April 2015, which, as far as I could see, seems to be the earliest one, where he used the term BUIDL in a presentation. He said to have more buy and sell orders, BUIDL, not just HODL. It was like it looks like a slide about looking at the price from a long-term view. So that would make sense if, the fact that Balaji is now at Coinbase, it would make sense as their CTO that he might have given them permission to trademark this term that he was a very early user of. I don't know. Again, this is the earliest use that I saw so far. I don't know if he actually came up with it. But yeah, the trademark was filed and people were understandably upset because it's like, really, you're going to trademark, a catchphrase? Is someone going to try and trademark HODL too?
Oh, yeah.
But what ended up happening is that Balaji tweeted, I think it was December 5th? December 6th, he tweeted, saw the commotion on Twitter and dug into this. Coinbase filed the trademark for BUIDL sometime back. I learned about it today and chatted with the team. TLDR is that Brian Armstrong and I don't believe in trademarks for stuff like this, so we will be giving this one back to the community. Kind of patronizing because it's like, what, you're giving it back? Do you own it? And he says, in more detail, the team had no intention to prevent the community from using it, as if that was ever actually going to happen. There had been thought of a feature named Coinbase BUIDL, and they didn't want to attract patent trolls for a common term, was 100% defensive filing. Okay, we'll take that explanation with a grain of salt. But yeah, it doesn't look like they're going to do that from the sounds of it, so everyone can stop freaking out.
Yeah, that give it back to the community line really kind of is like, are you serious? But in this, like I was just looking at it, like, yeah, these things came up way back, a while back in 2015. But really, this whole ETH Denver EOS community, I think it was at ETH EOS Denver convention for a weekend, and this word, however you want to pronounce it, BUIDL, that was like their main slogan for the whole thing. And for the weekend, it was like a hashtag. And then from that weekend, like I went to meetups a little bit later and they were still using it. And I mean, it kind of like, as far as something that threw it off in the idea of like, hey, this could be a meme. I think the ETH Denver EOS crew guys over there should probably be given a little credit because, yeah, it was said early on, but I don't think anybody, even like the whole HODL meme was powerful, but not as near as powerful as it is nowadays after, 2016 and 2017. And so, yeah, I think it's got something to do a little bit with that whole convention that happened here in Denver at the end of the summer, because it was like one of those where I didn't go to it, but a lot of people were telling me about it, saying it was this big thing. And a lot of people were there from within the industry. And so I wouldn't be surprised if some of those guys were just like, oh, yeah, this is kind of a good phrase. Maybe we should, use this on our platform.
Bum, bum, bum.
I can just imagine seeing the word BUIDL in some kind of logo with an R or trademark sign or something, or T.
And
Yeah.
we deal with it anyway.
Doesn't that just kill it?
Yeah, it does. Biddle. It was such a good word to biddle. I mean, like, it is kind of one of those funny ones where it's like, all right, like this is like hodl was like something where like sort of just came out of the expediency of typing, and now we got to just like incorporate in everything with the word that has LD at the end.
Mm-hmm. All right, so next up, last story. Gemini has gotten NYDFS approval to list Bcash. So this brings their total listed assets up to 5: Bitcoin, Ether, Litecoin, Zcash, and Bcash. And they are listing the ABC chain under the BCH ticker. And honestly, like my 2 cents, I really think at this point that this is tantamount to fraud. Like I really do. I any exchange out there that has chosen a single one of these chains to list under the BCH ticker, I think is committing a fraudulent act. And this is the exact same way that I felt when 2x was going on during the UASF and the New York agreement, that the incumbent chain is and will remain the currently listed asset on an exchange. Like it is just the only rationally and logically consistent way to identify something. And in the instance of this fork, the original chain does not exist. Both of the currently existing chains initiated a hard fork that was incompatible with the previous chain. And I think this is setting a horrible precedent. Like this is effectively attempting to give an exchange unilateral power over defining an asset that they list and trade on their platform. And they say that they're evaluating the possibility of listing SV in the future. But like this is not, I think, an ethical or ultimately, if this were ever to go to court, a legal way to handle this. Like defining a network is defining its consistency and compatibility going backwards. And both of these things have broken that. In the instance of previous forks, like I will say, as much as I've trolled about it on this show, that something like B Classic was just, it was a troll chain. There was not really legitimate economic support. It has stagnated to the point where the speed at which blocks come in are not even worth mentioning, despite the difficulty adjustment. There was no real economic weight behind it. That weight followed through with previous forks. But this fork is different in that there was no clear consensus among the network to move to a new chain. Like this has fragmented right down the middle, and neither of these chains have a legitimate claim to the ticker symbol BCH. And really, I think that like the Winklevi twins are setting a horrible precedent here that I do not think is good going forward. And that is effectively giving their exchange complete unilateral authority in defining an asset. And ultimately, that is, in my mind, just fraud.
Yeah, I mean, this is something right now where it's like, golly, like a year ago, these guys wouldn't lay off like Bitcoin Cash is BTC or is Bitcoin. And now they're just like trying to jump back to the idea that they are BCH and Bitcoin Cash in order to, I guess, retain some of that market structure that they've developed over the past year. But after this fork, they are two separate chains. I mean, there is the BAB and the BSV. And I mean, that's what the market is going with. And it should be the market to decide. And, if they list BCH, I mean, anybody listing BCH at this point should really be asking, like, what is BCH? I mean, because right now, BAB and BSV are the only ones out there, and they're competing to be Bitcoin, not Bitcoin Cash. I mean, they say Bitcoin Cash, but this is where they're just like they're absolutely getting confused and spun out on their own language and trying to find a way to grasp the network. But it's over for these guys. I mean, like I'm eating my popcorn as they're floating down the drain.
Yep, I am at this point just waiting for bankruptcy proceedings or shareholders taking control and dumping Bitmain's shares, and it will be a beautiful moment. But yeah, it's like really, it's like what the fuck are you thinking, like Winklevi, and like the consequences of this going forward and how this could potentially be abused in regards to other assets is just it is not okay.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I guess that sets us up for the final thoughts. And holy crap, 10 minutes till 2 hours. We made it.
Yeah, man.
All right, well, I guess you're up first, Janine.
Yeah, so kind of a contrast to Gemini. This is the BISC exchange, the decentralized exchange, saying that they are thinking about delisting BCH, and they are having a vote. So if you want to see it delisted and get rid of all this nonsense, then go and do that.
Yeah, I've seen some back and forth on that on Twitter, but if you don't support that, then go up there and voice your opinion. That's a decentralized exchange for you, letting the market kind of decide. So, I've got a final thought just on. I got a meetup coming this week. Was Thursday, but we got some weather moving in that's going to look pretty nasty, and might have someone, from the Mumble running through, and so it'd be we're going to be doing it Tuesday. Should be some nice weather. Come out and share a drink with us. All right.
All right, and mine is a little bit of holiday cheer to get us going in early December.
Oh,
Wanted
no.
to just give everybody a little clip of the Santa rally, I think, in New York so far this year. So let me just switch over my sound input and we'll get going.
It's the most wonderful time of the year, with the kids jingle belling and everyone to be of good cheer. It's the most wonderful time of the year. It's the happiest season of all, with those holiday greetings.
Yeah, just get ready for the fights. It's the holidays.
That is Christmas, everybody.
Speaking of holidays, what are we going to do with the show schedule? We are coming up on the end of a season, but we're not quite there because we missed some
Okay,
days.
hold on. 5, 1.
I think if we go today, we'll finish up right before Christmas.
4, 5. Okay, I think we'll have one will be a Sunday before Christmas Eve, and one will be a Wednesday the day after Christmas, and then I think that's the season.
All right.
The New Year's, that's the holiday. Let the families fight it out. Oof.
Alrighty, everybody. So I guess that wraps us up for today. And until next time, toodaloo.
Later, everyone.